Hello everybody. In today's lesson we're going to talk about 10.1 part 2. We're going to continue graphing ellipses. Remember, an ellipse is an oval shaped graph. It has a center point and it has 4 other main points, a maximum and min, a high and low vertical, like in part 1 along the y-axis, and then the 2 other of the 4 main points are a max and min, a high and low, horizontal on the x-axis. Now in part 1, when we graph an ellipse, we have the center point at the origin 0, 0, 0, 0. Here in part 2 today, we're going to graph an ellipse, but the center is not going to be at the origin. So we're going to see how the equation is a little different and how you graph it a little bit different. But a lot of how you graph it is also the same. So today, the center point's not the origin. It will be elsewhere on the coordinate plane. Now, the way you know in the equation, if the center moves from the origin 0, 0, is pretty much the same way that we've seen in other equations and other types of graphs. If you add or subtract any numbers to x or y, because remember in these equations, y isn't isolated, y and x are on the same side of the equation and it equals 1 on the other side. But if you add or subtract numbers to either x or y inside the parentheses, that is going to cause it to shift left and right, a horizontal shift, okay? Just like we've seen in equations before. If you add something inside to the x inside the parentheses, like in a sine or cosine graph, it's shifted it left and right a certain number of increments. So it's the same idea here, okay? Now, one key thing to keep in mind is, like we've also seen before, is that you really move opposite of what you think you would do, okay? So if you're adding a number, you're really going to move in the negative direction. So you would move down in the y direction or left in the x direction. If you're subtracting a number to the x or y, you're really moving in the positive direction. So it's the opposite of what you would think. So if you subtract a number, you're really moving up in the y direction or to the right in the x direction towards positive, okay? So that's one thing to keep in mind. Now, other than that, you proceed like normal. So just like we did in part 1, you would find the square root of the denominator numbers. Once you have it equal to 1, everything looks normal. Find the square roots of the denominator numbers, and that tells you how far to go up and down, left or right from your center point. So this right here, all right, looking at the numbers you're adding or subtracting to x or y, to determining whether you move up, down, left, or right, that will give you your center point, okay? Because they're not going to be at the origin. And then after you get your center point and the equation looks normal, all that's good to go, then you do what we did in part 1. You got to know how far to go up and down, left and right each way to make your ellipse or oval. And then you take the square roots of the bottoms. All right, so we're going to do some example graphs together. Let's look at number 1 first. All right, for number 1, it looks like a normal type of equation like we talked about in part 1. You've got it equal to 1 on the right, and you've got normal numbers in the denominator, but you will see that we have numbers we're adding or subtracting for part 2 today. All right, so all you have to do is take the opposite of these to get your center point. Remember, opposite. So your x-coordinate is -2, and your y-coordinate is +1. Because to get your center point, you would go left 2 and up 1. So that's your center point. So now that we have our center point, Now we need to know how far to go up and down, left and right to get our other 4 points. So square root of 9 is 3. That would be in the x direction, left and right, from the center point. Square root of 4 is 2. That would tell you how far to go up and down the y direction from your center point. All right? Now it's real easy to graph. So we have to have our center, left 2, up 1, 3, 2. So you can make your coordinate plane. That should work. More room in the second quadrant probably you want. So negative 2, 1. There's our center. Make sure you show that in your homework problems. And in the x direction, 3 to the left, 3 to the right. So 1, 2, 3. And then 1, 2, 3. And then the y direction, up and down, 2. So let me put some, so up 2 here, 1, 2. And once you have your center point and your 4 main max and min points, you can make your ellipse or oval. And just a nice, simple, I know it's not going to look perfect, so just do the best you can. And there you go. We have our ellipse. All right, let's look at number 2. Now, in number 2, you'll see that you can get your center point, which will be at negative 3, negative 2, because remember you take the opposite. But you don't have any denominator numbers, and you don't have it equal to 1. So if you remember what we did from part 1, you have to get a 1 here. So divide by 16. That'll get you your 1. And that will put a 16 below each of these. Now there's no coefficient number here, so this 16 will stay. But this 4 over 16 you have to reduce before you take the square root. Okay? So again, if you have a coefficient number like such, if you divide and put a denominator, you have to reduce. So this reduces to 1/4. All right, now you can take the square root of the bottom numbers to get how far you go out each direction. So square root of 16 is 4. So in the x direction, left and right, 4. Square root of 4 is 2. In the y direction, up and down 2 from the center point. And now we can easily graph. So this center point's in quadrant number 3. So I'm going to make my graph about like this. Negative 3, negative 2. There's our center point. Okay, in the x direction, left and right, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And in the y direction, I gotta go left 4. And in the y direction, up and down 2. So up 2, puts it right on the axis, and down 2, 1. I need another 1, 2 here. All right, so again, make sure you show center point, max and min, other 4 points each direction. And you can make your gorgeous looking ellipse. And there we have number 2. All right, moving right along. Let's look at number 3. All right, the equation looks normal. We have it equal to 1 and no coefficient number, so we don't have to reduce. Notice your x does not have a number in there. Now, your center point in the y direction would be positive 2 for the y coordinate. What do you think it is for x when there's no number in there? You're adding and subtracting. Right, it's 0. So again, if there's no number adding or subtracting by a variable, that coordinate is 0 for your center point. So there's your center point. Don't have to divide through by anything, so you can take the square roots to see how far you go up and down. So center point here, 5 left and right for X direction, 6 up and down Y direction, and we're ready to go ahead and graph number 3. All right, so this center point is up a few. And then we need to go up 2 for the center point, but then also up, so we need to go up 8. Make sure you go up to about 8. And then left and right at least a 5. Maybe another one if you want. All right, center point 0, 2. And then up 6 and down 6 for the Y direction. And then X direction left and right 5. And then after you have your 5 main points, center point 4, you can make your ellipse, which will be close to a circle because 5 and 6 are numbers that are close together. And there's number 3. All right, let's look at number 4, moving right along here. All right, number 4, you have it equal to 1. And you can take your center point, -3, -1 would be your center. Square root of 9 would be 3. So in the X direction, left and right 3. But look what you got over here. You don't have a number in the denominator. You don't have any denominator. What do you think you do here? Because you got to have a denominator to take the square root of that number to find out your radius in the Y direction. Remember, you can make anything a fraction by putting what number underneath? Right, a 1. Now, this is the same thing as it was, because anything over 1 stays the same. Now you can take the square root. Square root of 1 is 1. Now you know how far to go up and down the Y direction. All right, we're ready to go. Center at -3, -1, so that would be quadrant 3. So -3, -1, center point here. And in the Y direction, up and down 1. So up 1, down 1. X direction 3. Center point 1, 1, 2, 3. And 3 to the left. And you can make your ellipse. This is going to be a very ugly looking ellipse. Well, not too bad, I guess. All right, guys, there's number 4. And one more, number 5, to finish things off here in part 2. All right, let's look at this equation. All right, now you can go ahead and take your center point before you start doing stuff with the equation, because you'll notice we don't have denominators, we don't have a 1, so we're going to have to divide and move stuff around. But that's not going to affect our numbers on the inside. So you can take your center point at the beginning if you want. Center point 1, -3. Now, you're going to have to divide through by 36 to get your 1 here. Now, these numbers reduce nicely, because this will be 1/4. Divide each by, and you don't have to write the 1. And this will be 1/9. And you don't have to write the 1, 1 over 9. And then they're even nicer because the square root is 2. And the square root is 3. And again, guys, when you take the square root, if you get a decimal, no big deal. Just go ahead and approximate it on the grid. Not everything always works out to nice whole numbers all the time, okay? All right, so here we go. Center at 1, -3. And we'll finish things off by graphing number 5. And these are our radii each way. So here we go. So this is quadrant 4. So 1, -3. And we're going up and down 3. So 1, 2, 3. 2, 3. And 2 to the left and the right. So this is at 1, so 2. And center point 4 of the main points. And there is our ellipse for number 5. All right, guys, that is how you graph an ellipse if the center is not at the origin. On your homework, make sure that you follow how we did like this, and also show your center point and your 4 other main points, your high and low, max and min Y direction, and your high and low, max and min in the X direction. Have a good rest of your day, rest of your week and weekend, and talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.